Welcome to this webinar of the Jerusalem Press Club. We are privileged to host today Professor Shlomo Ben Ami, a renowned historian, former Minister of Foreign Affairs 20 years ago in the Barak government, and at present co-founder and vice president of the Toledo International Center for Peace, and author of the book Scars of War, Wounds of Peace, the Israeli-Arab Tragedy. Professor Ben Ami, welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, on a personal note, you were born in Morocco, and although we had relations with Morocco before, perhaps, how did it feel to hear that after the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan, Morocco joined as well?
Well, first, I am not particularly sentimental about it. I am rather rational. I think that, and the reason is that for many years, Israelis and Moroccans had working relations. I personally traveled a lot to Morocco before.
Complex situations in
I think the first time that I traveled to Morocco was in 1984, many years before the Oslo Accords. But what we see today is part of a trend that is taking place throughout the Arab world, essentially because of the demotion of the Palestinian problem from its previous centrality as the sort of epicenter of the worries of the Arab world, or presumably as the epicenter, because I don't think that it was sincerely always so central in the vision of the Arabs. But today, what we see is a process that was unleashed already in the wake of the failing Arab Spring. That is the fear of the incumbent conservative regimes in the Arab world, from Iran, from Islamic jihadism. And therefore, Israel has become to them a rather reliable ally particularly in the Middle East, compared with the United States. The United States has been withdrawing from its commitments in the region. It has been pivoting to the East, at least since 2010. And the peace between Arabs and Israelis was always about America. Israel was a vehicle to stronger relations between the Arab world and the United States. That was the case already with Sadat, if you remember. I mean, for him, it was about shifting alliances from the Soviet Union to the United States. And it is no surprise that the Assad regime in Syria started negotiations with Israel immediately after the fall of the Soviet Union, because they needed the United States. So the same about Morocco. The Moroccans did an extraordinary deal. I mean, this is the deal of the century for them, because they got recognition for Moroccan sovereignty over the Sahara, paying very little, because they practically went back to the situation that existed between the two countries in the wake of the Oslo Accords. It's extremely interesting what we have here. You see, they started having diplomatic relations because Oslo was important, or because the Palestinian problem in 1994 was important, and today they recover relations because the Palestinian problem is not important, is not as central as it used to be. So I think that this is the trend that we see all over. By the way, the Moroccans are also very worried about Iran. As far as I remember, they cut diplomatic relations with Iran. They severed diplomatic relations with Iran because the Iranians were meddling in the Sahara with the Polisario. So there is a convergence of interest that produced Morocco joining the general Arab trend that we see. if I may just end with one rather strong sentence, I think that what we are witnessing today is the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
The end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. That's very strong.
It is, but I think that for all practical purposes, this is what happens. Even, by the way, even without this formal recognition between these countries that we mentioned before and Israel, because there is no conflict really. Iran, Islamic jihadism, the survival of these regimes, the need to having better relations with the United States, Israel's technological edge, all of this has made Israel an indispensable or an important ally. So this is a dramatic change of paradigm, because normally we thought that peace with the Palestinians is the avenue, is the introduction to peace with the broader Arab world. Now it is the other way around, that you first make peace with the Arab world, and then we'll see what happens with the Palestinians.
Professor Ben Ami, that was quite a tour of the horizon, and we will, with your permission, we'll talk about some specific issues. But before that, can I ask you, there are a bunch of Spanish or Spanish-speaking journalists online here, and they are asking if you would be willing, perhaps, to say at the end of the session a few words in Spanish.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so guys, let's do that. I mean, we'll continue until a phase where we'll say goodbye, and then only the Spanish-speaking journalists will remain, and we'll ask Professor Ben Ami the question. So you mentioned America and the role of and the fact that everything is geared towards America. So before we discuss the possible Middle East policies of a Biden administration, let's talk a bit about the 4 years of Trump. How would you characterize the U.S.-Israel relation during the Trump term? Was he really the greatest friend of Israel, as he sometimes described here, or was it more rhetoric than substance?
Well, there was substance, but much of it was driven by domestic concerns. He behaved as a politician who needed to satisfy his constituency. I think that about 80%, this is what I understand, of the evangelist vote went to Trump. That was his most solid constituency, but he was also driven, I think, by a shift in the ideological positioning of the administration. I think that Trump would be remembered as a game changer in international politics in many ways. It was not an accidental presidency. His deglobalization, more authoritarian tendencies, the withdrawal from international agreements, patriotism or America first, nationalism, he was thinking in terms of a sort of Westphalian order, where the nation state is the central component of the international order or disorder. That is the nation state plus the balance of power. This was his philosophy. In a way, one could say that it started even with Obama. The withdrawal of Obama from commitments with his Arab allies, which is one of the reasons I believe that they came closer to Israel. So in many ways, more than a friend of Israel, he was the initiator of a new approach, one that has broad support within American constituencies, Republicans and others. So now we will see what happened with the Biden administration. I think that given the fact that the Democratic Party in the US has shifted so radically to the left, the best that Netanyahu or a right-wing government in Israel should have expected is the team Biden-Kamala Harris, because this is a more traditional presidency, one that is sensible to Israel's concerns. This is not a Sanders presidency. This is not a left-wing presidency. In that sense, I don't think that you will see a radical departure from the intimate relations that we had with the Trump administration. Palestine is not going to be high priority. I think they will change the style, they will change the attitude, but a return to negotiations on the two-state solution is a chimera. This won't happen under this administration, or for that matter, under no administration. The two-state solution, for all practical purposes, is dead and buried. And the best that the Biden administration can do is try and improve the living conditions of the Palestinians and alleviate the burden of occupation in some way. But I don't see that you will come here and start a Bill Clinton style peace process.
It takes a Trump to say in a whim to Morocco, make peace with Israel, you can have Sahara, or moving the embassy to Jerusalem. So this is something which goes against the traditional diplomacy that we know. You as an historian and a diplomat, how do you see this new wave? It's one-time aberration because of Trump, or something new that may even stay?
Well, his style is unique. There's no doubt about it. But isolationism is not alien to American diplomacy. It took 2 or 3 years before, after the start of First World War, that America joined it. If it were not for Pearl Harbor, perhaps it would haven't joined it. It would haven't joined the Second World War either, and they were not members of the League of Nations. So there is a strong isolationist current in American foreign policy. I think that he changed the style. This unilateral recognition of Moroccan sovereignty of the Sahara and the Golan Heights in Israel is something that only a Trump could have done. But if you take the case of the Sahara, you should give credit also to Moroccan international diplomacy. The Moroccans have been making quite some serious headway in getting international actors in Africa and elsewhere, France, for example, in Europe, to accommodate these positions with the view that the Moroccans have on the Sahara. The Polisario never had the kind of international support that the Palestinian cause elicited internationally. I think that, and they used it quite wisely. I mean, the Moroccans have done a very good job in terms of legitimizing that position on the Sahara.
You said that the Polisario doesn't enjoy the same strength of international recognition that the PLO has over Palestine or parts of Palestine. But can you draw an analogy here that if Trump defies the international consensus on Sahara, so he can defy the international consensus on the West Bank, on Palestine?
Well, I think that there was more of a consensus over Palestine than over the Sahara, obviously. And yet he managed to marginalize the Palestinian problem. He imposed all kinds of penalties on the Palestinians. He withdrew financial aid for the refugees. He closed the embassy, the Palestinian embassy in Washington, and nothing really happened. The problem is, and this applies to both the Sahara and Palestine. The problem is that the world has changed. We are not talking here about extraordinary statesmanship. We are talking about a world, take Europe, or that is immersed in its own difficulties, its own problems, be it the pandemic, be it the financial crisis, be it the identity problem of the European Union, Brexit, the deep divisions within Europe. There is an existential crisis in the European Union. So I think that in this context, even without Trump, the preoccupation with Palestine, and that this is, in my view, the major political blunder of the Palestinians. They always thought that the concern, legitimate and understandable, of the international community with the Palestinian tragedy would be a permanent factor, will exist forever. No, but history is about change and condition change. And today I saw the speech by the current Palestinian Prime Minister, Mohammed Shtayyeh, a very good man, who publicly recognized the end of the two-state solution. He said that we have been defeated by the indifference of the international community and by the Arab world that has betrayed us. So now we should change the peace paradigm, no more fighting for the two-state solution, but for a one-state reality with equal rights for the Palestinians. If this is a South African situation, let us find a South African solution. This is more or less what Mohammed Shtayyeh comes to say.
And what do you think about it? Because you said before that on one hand, the Arab-Israeli conflict is over. On the other hand, you said the two-state solution is over. So what do we have? I mean, what lies ahead?
Well, what lies ahead is that Israel should confront the dilemma of a one-state reality, that is the South African situation, which is what the Palestinians are calling for. That is, for the Israelis to face to the consequences of the end of the two-state solution, because there is no other way out of the dilemma. Either you give us a two-state solution which you are not capable and about which the international community has practically no leverage in order to produce it, or you give us equal rights. I think that one possibility, and this depends on the kind of government that might exist in Israel in the foreseeable future, and that is that if Israel faces the dilemma, which is a typical Zionist dilemma, what is more important, demography or territory? I think personally that Zionism was more about demography than about territory. And whenever the Zionist movement faced the problem of more land with a less homogeneous Jewish majority, it opted for less land and a more homogeneous Jewish majority. For example, in the war of 1948, the resistance of then Prime Minister Ben-Gurion of invading the West Bank for demographic reasons, and the second example, is Ariel Sharon, who withdrew from the from the Gaza Strip because of demographic reasons, and he was about to do the same in the Golan Heights for the same reasons. So I think that at some point you might find a government that would like to go back to Ehud Olmert's convergence plan, that is converging into the borders of the wall / fence, and allowing some sort of Palestinian entity on the border. Do not forget, Uri, that the very fact that Sharon built the wall was and should be seen as a philosophical defeat of the Israeli right, because they never thought that you should erect a wall in the heart of Judea and Samaria. The fact that this was done by a hawk like Sharon, under certain conditions, might be repeated by others, I think.
Are you talking about the philosophical defeat of the Israeli right, but politically, the right in Israel seems to be as strong as ever? You've been advocating for a long time that there was no solution other than by some kind of international intervention, perhaps forcing the hand of Israel and creating an international mandate in the Palestinian territory that would eventually will lead to the implementation of Clinton's parameters. Do you believe that this is a possible scenario?
No, I don't believe anymore that this is a possible scenario. I thought in the past it was possible, but ask yourself, Uri, what is exactly the international community today? I mean, do we have an international community acting collectively to solve international problems? I hope that multilateralism will be recovered in some way by the Biden administration, but there are limits to what they can achieve. Multilateralism is alien to the political vocabulary of the Chinese. They would benefit as much as they can from multilateralism, but this is not part of their Weltanschauung. I mean, this is not the way they see the world. And so I don't see that you can put together this kind of international coalition to force the hand of Israel so that it allows the creation of a two-state solution. I think that these are no longer times for such an initiative. It's over. I simply think that it won't work.
So it's up to mainly the Israelis to make the decision.
And the Arab neighborhood. I think that the fact that you will have in Tel Aviv a score of Arab embassies, it won't be easy, for example, today for Israel to launch another massive attack on Gaza, as in the past. It won't be easy. I mean, these guys would not be able to resist the pressure of the Arab street if Israeli F-16s again start an onslaught on Hamas positions in Gaza. So I think that there is an advantage for the Palestinians, although they don't see it right now, for this normalization with Arab countries. They have now a leverage on Israel. So whether this leverage would be sufficient to produce the two-state reality, I wonder. I wonder because Israeli opinion, as you yourself say, shifted radically to the right, and because there is no indication whatsoever that the Palestinians have changed their minimal conditions for such an agreement. That is, they want the borders of 1967. They want some return of refugees. They want dismantling of settlements, etc., etc. So I think that for such a solution to still have the ghost of a chance, I think it requires also a meaningful change of position by the Palestinians, which I don't see these happening.
I sense how strong you speak about it, having yourself witnessed it firsthand in Camp David, 2000, and you wrote about it in your book. But you wrote your PhD dissertation at Oxford on Primo de Rivera, who was appointed prime minister in Spain in 1923. And when he was appointed, he said he wanted to be in power for 90 days only. But then he ruled till 1930. When Netanyahu was asked way back how long he wants to be prime minister, he said 2 terms only, because longer is not healthy. It seems that he changed his mind since many Israelis became convinced that he's irreplaceable. What is your take on what's happening now in the internal Israeli political scene?
Well, you see, I think the comparison doesn't work here because all military takeovers, not only the Spanish one that you mentioned, all military takeovers start with the promise that we will give back power to the civilians at some point. Here you have a parliamentary system that, as far as I know, nowhere in the world there is a limit for the term, a prime minister term in a parliamentary system. This always happens in presidential systems. Look, I know in Spain, Felipe González was prime minister for 13 years. In the UK, I think that Margaret Thatcher for 10 years, and Tony Blair as well. So I think that there is no reason why you should not have a constitution that limits the terms of a prime minister also in parliamentary systems. You see, because the difference between presidential and parliamentary system is that here it is not the people that elects the prime minister. It is the balance of forces within the parliament that decides the election of the prime minister. And this can be changed by a basic law, by a fundamental law that as we have in Israel so many other fundamental laws, this can be such a law. But the best would be to defeat Netanyahu and the current rules of the game. I mean, the problem is that there isn't right now a serious alternative, and the left has been weakened, and the center left lacks convincing leadership. This might change at some point. I hope. I think it will be very bad for Israeli democracy if Netanyahu is eventually toppled by the court. That is, if he ends his political career because he loses his trial. I think this will leave behind a legacy among his constituencies, just as Trump, with all the difference, is trying to build a legacy that his presidency was stolen from him. He knows that he lost the election, but the only thing he wants is to leave behind his legacy so that he can build on it in the future. The same can happen with Netanyahu if he is toppled because he lost his case, his judicial case. He could say, you see, that was a conspiracy of the liberals, of the judicial system, and this will maintain the flame of support that he has among very substantial constituencies in this country.
Professor Ben Ami, thank you. That concludes our session in English. I want to thank all the journalists who joined up till now, and goodbye. We'll continue in Spanish for the benefit of the few Spanish-speaking journalists here. As Talia wrote to you, the recording of the briefing will be uploaded to JPC's YouTube channel very soon. Thank you very much, everybody. Now let's switch to Spanish, and the Spanish-speaking journalists, you can unmute yourself. And Ana Garalda, why don't you start? Ana? Okay, anybody? Ana?
Okay. So,
Rachel?
yeah, I don't know what's going on. So Ana wrote a question here privately.
You can speak in Spanish.
Ok, gracias. Tenemos a Ana, Juan Carlos, Sal, ¿quieren preguntar algo directamente?
¿Sí? ¿Cuál es la pregunta?
No responden acá.
Sí, por
Okay.
favor.
Acá, Juan Carlos, gracias.
Hola, señor Ben Ami. Habla
Sí,
usted
hola.
de... Buenos días. Habla usted de la realidad de un solo Estado, como tras el fracaso de la realidad de los dos Estados. Habla de una salida como la Sudáfrica de nuestros días. ¿No cree también que la realidad actual en estos momentos, en la Israel y Palestina, es la realidad de Sudáfrica de hace 30, 40 años, con dos estados donde uno está dominando a otro, o incluso se ha llegado a hablar de un sistema de apartheid, ¿no? ¿Cómo lo ve usted?
Bueno, como decía, yo creo que en la condición israelí, una situación surafricana difícilmente puede acabar en una solución surafricana. O sea, una solución en la que la mayoría demográfica asume el control político del país. Aquí estamos hablando de un nacionalismo judeo-israelí que se ha convertido en una especie de superpotencia regional y que tiene, a diferencia de Sudáfrica, un apoyo a nivel global realmente extraordinario. Yo creo que en los últimos años Israel ha mejorado su despliegue diplomático a nivel internacional en Asia, los gigantes asiáticos, China, Japón, la India, por sus capacidades económicas y tecnológicas, el apoyo realmente casi incondicional por parte de Estados Unidos. Yo creo que Israel lo que intentará en esa situación es si efectivamente degeneramos en esa situación de un Estado, intentar bajo digamos, la influencia de las democracias occidentales que seguirán presionando en la buena dirección, de hacer lo mejor posible para mejorar las condiciones de vida de los palestinos, ¿no? Para evitar el símil, la metáfora surafricana. Pero yo francamente creo que hay aquí anticuerpos bastante fuertes en la sociedad israelí que se oponen a una realidad de un Estado y que tarde o temprano llegará aquí algún primer ministro con una fuerza política considerable que pueda llevar a cabo una retirada calculada y controlada de una gran parte de Cisjordania, como lo pensó en su día el primer ministro Ehud Olmert. Y lo pensó el propio Ariel Sharon, ambos, por cierto, personas que llegaban de la derecha, incluso de la extrema derecha. Así que esos anticuerpos espero que en algún momento se impongan políticamente y eviten la situación del Estado. También existe la posibilidad, no olvidemos que hay un factor que siempre se margina cuando hablamos de la cuestión palestina, y es Jordania. Jordania tiene intereses muy importantes en Cisjordania. También es otra posibilidad de que si en algún momento Jordania es incorporada con la ayuda de la comunidad internacional, con la ayuda del mundo árabe, al proceso de paz, es posible a lo mejor pensar en una solución jordano-palestina. Siempre, no olvidemos que Oslo fracasó porque intentó de puentear el concepto de Madrid. El concepto de Madrid era jordano-palestino. La delegación palestina en Madrid fue una delegación jordano-palestina. Oslo fue un intento de eludir el concepto de Madrid, y visto de esta perspectiva, Oslo fracasó, porque no consiguió lo que el plan que tenía de crear una solución netamente palestina. Madrid hablaba de una solución jordano-palestina. Todavía existen ciertos paradigmas que valdría la pena explorar.
Hola, ¿se me puede escuchar ahora?
Sí, se escucha, Ana.
Hola, sí, hello, sorry, I'm gonna change into Spanish.
Sí, sí.
Sorry for our colleagues, English-speaking ones.
That's okay, that's okay.
Okay. Sí, señor Ben Ami, había escrito 2 preguntas por privado porque tenía ciertos problemas para conectar el audio. La primera sería, en relación a la cuestión española, ¿usted cree, primero, qué representa este anuncio por parte de Trump reconociendo la soberanía marroquí sobre el Sáhara? ¿Cómo cree usted que esto puede afectar a España? Y la segunda pregunta estaría enfocada a, ¿cree usted que con un gobierno distinto, con mejores relaciones con la administración Trump, esto hubiera sucedido igualmente?
Bueno, en España, como dijo la ministra que estuvo aquí hace unos días, España ve con buenos ojos que Marruecos e Israel se reconcilien, pero cree que la cuestión del Sahara tiene que tener una solución según las líneas de la comunidad internacional. No olvidemos que en España hay una sensibilidad muy grande, particularmente en sectores liberales, socialistas, sobre la cuestión del Sahara que fue español, y ahora los marroquíes lo quieren como parte de ese proceso que Mohamed VI llama regionalización, o sea, convertir el Sahara en una región entre las otras regiones marroquíes. Yo creo que España seguirá la línea, esa es mi intuición, no reconocerá esa soberanía, intentará de cuadrar el círculo entre su necesidad realmente vital de buenas relaciones con Marruecos y al mismo tiempo quedarse en línea con la comunidad internacional en general. Pero los años llevarán a que, incluso sin declararlo, al final lo que ha hecho Trump se quedará como una realidad aceptada internacionalmente. Si no, Francia, si España toma una decisión o más bien se convierte en un portavoz demasiado asertivo a favor de del no reconocimiento de la soberanía marroquí sobre el Sahara, estará dando una ventaja económica, estratégica, diplomática muy grande a Francia. Otra cuestión es la cuestión de Argelia, ¿no? Para España, Argelia es un país muy importante y por lo tanto tendrá que mantener también ese equilibrio. Los argelinos evidentemente son contrarios a la soberanía marroquí en el Sahara. Son momentos muy difíciles para la diplomacia española y según he visto a través de la ministra, lo que intentarán hacer es realmente ese equilibrio difícil no reconocer públicamente la soberanía, seguir en la línea de la comunidad internacional y al mismo tiempo mantener el equilibrio entre Marruecos y Argelia. No va a ser fácil. Y evitar que otros ganen terreno a costa de España. Más que nada Francia, que tiene muchísima influencia y una amistad muy íntima en Marruecos. Lo que se refiere a la segunda pregunta, me decía usted...
Sí, la segunda pregunta es si usted cree que con un gobierno más conservador, las relaciones entre, con mejores relaciones entre España y Estados Unidos, las relaciones ahora mismo tampoco es que sean muy buenas, eso habría afectado a la hora de que Trump en la recta final de su presidencia hubiese hecho este anuncio del reconocimiento sobre el Sáhara.
De la soberanía de... es posible que sí, ¿no? Está claro que Trump no es muy delicado, ¿no? En su comprensión de los matices de la política internacional, ¿no? Quiere algo, va por ello, paga el precio, le da igual. Y por lo tanto, otra administración, si fuera la administración Biden, intentaría entender qué efecto tiene esto sobre otros aliados de Estados Unidos. Al fin y al cabo, España es un aliado de Estados Unidos y no hace mucho se regularizó, creo, la situación americana en las bases en España. España es un aliado como miembro de la OTAN y bilateralmente también, como quien ya hace años ofrece servicios estratégicos muy importantes a Estados Unidos. Otro presidente seguramente lo hubiera calculado o lo hubiera calibrado de otra manera, no me cabe duda.
Muchas gracias.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Ben Ami. Thanks for being with us today, doing it in both languages. I'd like to thank my JPCBriefing colleagues, Talia Dekel and Rachel Exil, for facilitating this webinar. Stay tuned to our next events and stay safe. Happy Hanukkah and goodbye.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.